Everyone, welcome back. I'm Gabriel Allen Cummings.
And I'm Sonika Garcia.
And this is Breaking the Code, a podcast series by the Havas Medical Anthropology team. We're here to take the BS out of behavioral science by illuminating the why behind the what of behaviors, rituals, and symbols that people take for granted. We hope to arm you, our listeners, with the tools you need to make sense of behavioral science and help you apply to your work as communication extraordinaires. So welcome back, everybody. I think that this is going to be a really interesting and fun episode. And Sonika, I'm more grateful to have you on than usual today, which is usually a 10 out of 10. This is an 11 out of 10 because we're talking strict behavior science here, really getting down to something that we talk about a lot. I mean, we're in marketing, and so we're talking about changing behaviors, and that's really the name of the game. And one thing that we get approached with a lot is a conversation about inertia. And I'll just very briefly say for anybody who needs the little bit of guidance, inertia really comes from Newton's first law of physics. Objects in motion stay in motion, objects in rest stay at rest. When we apply it to behaviors, it's really talking about how people do things and kind of get stuck in their ways. And, a lot of times we're approached as behavioral science experts at Havas. How do we break that inertia? How do we get people to think differently? Whether it's, patients are delaying care seeking. Now, there's a lot of reasons why they should not be doing that. But if we're going to have a conversation about why they are, this is an understanding of behaviors that they are inert in. And then when we talk about HCPs, I think a common one that people go to a lot is the idea that they're not adopting new therapies, even though it could provide that better quality of life for patients. For some reason, HCPs are stuck in their ways. They are inert and they are unable to make that change, even though it makes a lot of sense. So, Sonika, with that as the introduction, is there anything else you'd like to say or teach us about inertia before we really dive in?
No, I think that was great. Thanks, Gabe. I feel like, we've mentioned inertia. Obviously, behavior change is really the foundation of this podcast. And I think what really prompted, and let me know if you agree, what prompted us to do this episode and dive in is that we talk a lot about buzzwords, right? We notice that certain behavioral science words are becoming more popular in use amongst people even outside of the field. And I think we've been sitting in, whether it's client meetings or internal meetings, and really hearing a lot of people using this word inertia. And so it always then gives us the opportunity, or the cue rather, to let's actually take a step back. Let's dive into it a bit more on our end and actually put an episode out on what it is. We want everyone to be able to use it and understand it. And so I think that was sort of what prompted us to do this episode. Everyone's using it and talking about it and really making sure that we can clarify what it's about and how it might be different from other things that we talk about. So no, I mean, I think how you kicked it off was great. And we'll dive in a bit more.
And it's clarify and contextualize, right? And so
yes.
we're finding that, inertia is one of those words, like you said, a buzzword that people are using a lot. And so when it comes to these buzzwords, it's just making sure that we're not saying, HCPs are inert and that's the end of the story. That's for us the beginning of the story. What's motivating that inertia? What's getting to the bottom of it? And so it's even pushing, as you were saying, teams and clients to say, okay, we've discovered inertia. We found a behavior, and we will get into what makes a behavior an inert behavior specifically. But let's say we found one. Now we have to understand where is it coming from. And I won't give a lot of the game away here, but it is really, this episode is going to be taking that extra step. And so one thing that came out for me, Sonika, is really a thought about habits and behaviors and inertia. So my understanding of inertia is that you're stuck in your ways, you can't do something. But how is that different from a habit? Something where my understanding of that is I have a behavior that I do. It's my go-to behavior. Are all habits inert behavior?
It's a great question. So before I answer that or start talking about habits and inertia, I want to just take a moment to define how we understand inertia. And so so first of all, we are experts in the field, but it doesn't mean that we stop learning at any point. We're constantly, re-looking into behavioral change strategies and what's new. What are people talking about? What has evolved? What way we need to change in the way that we approach behavior change. And so with that being said, I took a step back into the way that I've always understood inertia for the last, 6-7 years in practicing behavioral science within marketing. And just to kind of re-look at how to define it, I always would say that inertia was the low cost of doing nothing and basically just doing nothing. But that word nothing is significant, but it's actually not doing nothing. It's important to reframe that, because inertia is actually the act of doing the same thing, even if doing something different is better. And that person who's doing the behavior knows that there's a better option, but you still continue to do the same thing. So not to get too into it, but like inaction, sure, it's an action. Inaction is an action. But when we talk about inertia, we always need to think about what is the person doing, not what is the person not doing. So I just want to frame that, and I wanted to speak about it differently. It's not doing nothing. It's actually just doing the same thing. Okay. So with that being said, people also often mistake inertia for resistance, but it's actually just comfort. And we talk a lot about the fact that feelings and emotion drive so much of the behavior that the actions that we take every day. And so that's an important distinction, because resistance is, we know what resistance is, but the important part here is that it's not actually the act of resisting something. It's the act of feeling comfort in something else. And comfort is a really strong emotion. Comfort is associated with trust. It's associated with certainty, these things that human beings seek for every day. So if we know that an inert behavior is something that is comfort seeking, that's really hard to change, right? Because human beings want to be comfortable. So another important distinction, it's not resistance, it's comfort. And so in marketing, in our roles, we're not just dealing with someone who, we see an inert behavior taking place, someone who's resisting or there's apathy. It's actually quite the opposite. There's a lot of emotion that needs to be, and a lot of care and a lot of feelings towards the thing that you are continuing to do. It's not just more flippant in like, oh, well, there's just nothing else to do. No, you are invested in your current behavior because it is giving you something. And so we need to, as marketers, really dissolve that strong logical and emotional glue. And that's what we're really, really tasked with. So I just wanted to lay out that is how we're speaking of inertia. It's wanting to do the same thing, even knowing that something else might be better. So now with that definition, I can, I'll get a little bit into the difference between habit and inertia, because they are different. They're related, as many of these like foundational behavioral science principles are. You can't really have one without the other, but they're different. So I heard this distinction. I thought it made a lot of sense. We talk about habits a lot, and like we've talked about like the habit loops and how I think we've talked about on the podcast, but habits are fueled by rewards, cues, and an action. And it's literally laid out in this circular cue. If anyone has, or circular loop, if anyone's read The Power of Habit, it's directly from that book. And so these things feed into one another and allow a habit to continue. I look at inertia as more of a system rather than a loop. So it's not just 3 or 4 constructs working together in a loop and feeding into one another, but rather it's a system of many different things, right? Experiences, emotions, cues as well, but they all exist as part of this interconnected web that allows an inert behavior to take place. And I think the important distinction between saying a loop and a system is when you're in a loop, right? We talk about it also just in everyday behaviors. It's hard to break. One thing is feeding into another, and it's just kind of going and going and going like wheels on a car. It just goes. When you think about a system, there's a rational component there. There is thought in that system that one thing feeds into another, but then something else might come in as a barrier and break that. And it's a little bit more complex. And so, all that to say, habits are automatic and subconscious. They often just happen without us even realizing it. Gabe, if I asked you, what was well, I mean, if I asked you what was the first thing you did when you woke up in the morning, you might remember. But if I asked you things like, what coffee mug did you grab this morning when you were making your coffee? If you asked me that, I make my coffee every single morning. I wouldn't be able to tell you like how that worked. I know that it happens. I know I get from point A to point B, but I really don't remember the intricacies of what happens in that, because a lot of that's habitual. Whereas inertia, that is not automatic and subconscious. Sure, there are inert behaviors that are fueled by habits. And you think about that system, habits are part of that system, but it's not the sole thing. So at the end of the day, there is rational, logical, conscious thinking that is involved in an inert behavior taking place. So I think that's the biggest distinction, or inertia can be fueled by habits, but also by other forces, things like the fear of uncertainty, cognitive overload. You just, think about doctors, or too many things that you're thinking of, and it almost leads to some sort of like paralysis where you're not able to change your behavior. Emotional comfort, system level frictions in, more like logistical, what's going on in a practice, again, thinking about doctors. So all of these things work together as a system, habits being one component. So when we as marketers talk about breaking inertia, we have to think about the habits that are existing for an inert behavior to take place. We oftentimes always say, hey, let's do a habit loop. A brand comes to us, we can't change behavior, we think inertia is at play. Let's do a habit loop to really understand one component of why that inertia is taking place. But again, it's just one component. So that's really the distinction. Sorry, I feel like I just blabbed and blabbed, but yes.
No, I think that I just want to jump in. And I think that one of the things that you were saying really stuck out to me. And it's that conversation about comfort and logic, or emotion and logic, really, and how like we will try to logically justify the inertia that we find ourselves caught in. And even, that's probably an emotional response I'm hearing from what you're saying to, the desire to be comfortable, desire to protect this habit, or this collection of habits that I'm doing, that I'm used to, that will even resort to things like flawed logic and say like, this treatment actually works better for my patients. In my experience, there's nothing else that could be better. My patients are more comfortable. My patients are well treated. And then you get into like the distinction between patients will say, well, no, I'm not very well treated. And HCPs will say, from my experience, they look perfectly fine. They're doing perfectly well.
Yeah. I mean, exactly what you said. I think, when there's comfort and a sense of security, protection, those are very strong forces. That's a very strong glue. And to break that, we need to get pretty deep into understanding those things that shape the person. And so giving them stats and data, and it's not just one thing. Again, if we lay out the ecosystem of a behavior, of an inert behavior in that literally that system, we need to effectively break inertia. We can't just tackle one. We can't just give doctors a KOL program to make them feel like, oh, my peers are doing it. That's such a small component of what might be fueling that comfort or that confidence. And so as marketers, we really just need to look at the complete picture and how many different points can we intersect in that system, in that journey, to break that behavior. Another thing that's really interesting, we were talking to Jenny when we were thinking about this episode, and something that she said that was really interesting, and something that I want to call out is because it's a system, and people, part of that system are other people. So you think about a doctor that's doing the inert behavior and they're existing in the system. It is the inertia of other people in that system as well that are fueling a doctor's inertia. So oftentimes we would say, yeah, maybe we have a project and it's an HCP focused project, but hey, we also need to look at the inertia that's affecting their patients, realizing that that's a strong influence for their behavior, their inert behavior as well. So no group can be looked at in a silence. Like, you have to look at them in a system with other people who are also seeking comfort and security. And how do we tackle everyone's inertia at the same time? It's not boiling the ocean, but there is a way to do it in more of a systematic way. So yes.
And so when we get into this idea of tackling, or as we commonly hear, break inertia, I mean, even just through this conversation, I'm almost hearing that maybe the question should be different and not necessarily how do we break inertia? It's more like, how do we replace that emotional comfort? How do we replace that thing with another thing that they can latch on to, become emotionally comfortable with, and build a lot of what brought them to an inert behavior in the first place. But I will ask it in the traditional way that we do, just for the sake of this episode, and so everybody's following along. When it comes to breaking habits and breaking inertia, how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think, again, since habits are a part of the inertia system, if we're thinking about breaking a habit, then we do so, as I mentioned before, in that habit loop. So really investigating what are the cues, rewards, and actions that are occurring in a loop to allow this subconscious habit to continue. And so really, it would just be interrupting that loop. So whether it being replacing a certain cue, replacing an existing cue with something new, adding some rewards that, so if you know, we identified the top 5 rewards that maybe a doctor feels is impacting their ability to continue on with the habit, then how do we introduce new rewards? So it's really just that loop and breaking that loop. Again, that lives below the level of consciousness, so it would be subtle ways to sort of change that habit. When we think about inertia, it's really about lowering, it's a few things. So for one, it's about lowering the activation energy. So making that first step feel really easy, whether it's having a hard conversation, how do we give doctors, tools to help them, whatever it may be, whatever that first step is, whether it's a conversation, prescribing something different, seeking out information that they're not currently seeking out. How do we make that first step as easy as possible and really lowering the fence? How do we do that? And then we need to tap into, so that's very functional. And then we need to tap into the psychological, which is a bit more complex and a bit more complicated. So really, what are, again, the top psychological drivers that are that's allowing this inert behavior to take place, whether it's comfort, whether it's, well, what are my peers doing? Or what if it's loss aversion and I'm remembering a past experience that was negative for one of my patients, really getting to that level of depth to then tackle the cognitive and emotional component. And then I think lastly, so basically that's just, really a fancy way of saying we tackle the functional and then we tackle the emotional. And all of these insights should come through research, right? We need to understand our audience in order to even do this. So this is all assuming we have that research and that backing to do so. And then I would say that it's really to reframe what it means to continue on that same habit. How do we frame up the consequences of inert behavior? And it will differ per audience, and the strategies to do so will differ. So there are many ways to do that, but I would say just reframing what it means to do the same thing. And then lastly, I think it's just really helping the audience, whoever it is, see the situation differently. If they see the situation the same way that they've always seen it, they're most likely to take the same behavior that they always done. Even if we're giving them that low cost of entry, we're addressing their emotional barriers. If they're still seeing the scenario as being this a similar scenario that they have had before. So I'm seeing this patient with these conditions, and so I'm going to prescribe the same thing that I always have. They're going to continue. It's going to be hard to break that. If we can change the way that our audience sees a particular scenario, kind of rewriting the story in a way, that's really like the cherry on top. We do all of that background. We take the research, we try to reframe and shift the environment and their emotion, and we get into all that. But really, we need to back all the way out at the end of the day and just reframe the problem, and communicate that reframed problem to our audience. They need to see it as something different, I would say. So yeah, I mean, best case scenario, what we would love in our practice is like, hey, there's an inert behavior. We do a habit. We do primary research. We do secondary research. We do a habit loop because we understand what the habitual behaviors that are fueling inertia are, and then we tackle breaking inertia through the ways I just said. But I'm simplifying it. It's in depth. It's complex, but it also is the only way to ensure that behavior change strategies are going to survive the test of time. Oftentimes we see, this didn't work and we're not seeing behavior changing. And it's because we're not getting to this level of understanding the human. So
I just want to say I have a appreciation for even taking everyone through this approach, because it really feels like research and data meets empathy. And this is from a conversation where we're talking about making things easy, changing their mindset. And it starts from an understanding of who this person is and where they're coming from, whether they're doing behaviors that we like or don't like. And then how do we get them to the next step? It's really more about pushing an evolution as opposed to saying someone's right or someone's wrong. Even if someone is wrong, it's approaching it from a perspective of understanding where they're coming from first. And then how do we, based on their approach to where they're coming from, it's how do we change their mindset like that? I think one question I have is, we talk a lot about breaking inertia. Is there ever a time where we can leverage inertia, where we can leverage where people are kind of stuck in their ways or something? And I say stuck in their ways, and that's a negative connotation, but I'm more getting at the idea that people have found things that work. Is there a way that we can leverage that actively?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think, we talk about breaking inertia and we focus on these behaviors that we want to change. But as part of that mapping the system and the ecosystem, I think leaning into the fact that our audience is probably doing positive behaviors that are inert, that we want them to continue to do. And so how do we leverage the positive inertia and the positive inert behaviors to help us break the ones that we want to break? So for example, with patients, a lot of the strategies that we have, whether it's awareness, I know we're working on a cholesterol brand right now. We say we're trying to get a patient to change their diet, change their lifestyle, whatever it may be. A huge behaviors change strategy, which is leveraging positive inertia, is how do we tie this behavior change to remind patients that they are doing other behaviors that are positive, so they can do that, they can do this. It's like drawing the association between, something that we want to change to something that they're already doing. Same thing with doctors. I think that with any audience, there's always positive behaviors that we want to tap into, and it's motivating. It's a strategy for motivation. How do you get someone to feel confident to make a change, confident to make another decision, give that motivation? It's by reminding them that they've done this before. There are behaviors that are very similar to what we are asking them to do that they're already doing so well. And it's a great strategy, even from an emotional standpoint, to get people to, again, feel that confidence to make a change and to do something differently.
I know last night you sent over the thing on Teams. It's like you wanted to do inert behaviors in our own lives. Do you still want to do that?
I forgot about that. Yeah, we can. Let me think about one. I haven't even thought about one. Do you have one? Maybe you can inspire me.
Yeah, I think I have one. And so mine is, I was going to the laundromat the other day, and there's usually there's a big laundromat that I like to go to. It's 24 hours, all that stuff, always the machines available, everything like that. I end up taking the bus, and I end up, having to take a different route to go to said laundromat. It's a bit further away. And I end up walking past an open laundromat that's perfectly fine. And I look at it as I'm walking past it saying, oh, there goes a laundromat, but I'm going to my laundromat. And I kind of stopped in the middle of the street, not the street literally, but the sidewalk, and wait a second, why are we carrying this big thing of laundry all the way down the block, all the way over there to go to that laundry? And I'm thinking to myself, it's 24 hours, and it's 2 p.m. on a Sunday. You don't need a 24-hour laundromat right now. Just go to the one that's right there. You don't have to work as hard, carry the stuff. I had other places I wanted to go, and that laundromat was just closer. And so I was it was a big emotional shift for me to feel comfortable to walk into that one. And I don't interact with anybody at that laundromat. I just put the clothes in the machine. It all takes the same amount of coins and everything. It's the same thing, but it was just like a big shift. And I was really standing in the middle of the sidewalk there, kind of like contemplating my options and why it was so difficult for me to say, no big laundry today. We're going to the smaller laundromat right there.
That's so good. I love that example. That's so inertia. And you see how that's inertia because you are able to rationally think about the fact that there's this other laundromat that might be a better option. A habit, you wouldn't be doing that. Like, and you're not able to even realize, like, you're not able to stop and pause and be like, okay, the fact that you're able to do that really shows that that's inert behavior. I feel like one that I'm thinking of that just is, I think it's just because it's more sealing my mind, but it's like less, it's just like it's really like an everyday thing is I'm a big coffee drinker. And so like iced coffee in the summer and hot coffee in the winter. Like you will not see me drinking an iced coffee after October, and you won't see me drinking from October to May, I'm drinking hot coffee, and then in the summer I'm drinking iced coffee. But this summer, particularly, the weather has been so crazy. Now it's hot, but it was cold, like whatever. And I remember I came into the office, I was in a jacket, I was freezing. It was June. And I ordered an iced coffee. And I was like, why did I order this iced coffee? Like, if weather-wise, I really should be ordering a hot coffee. But it was like, no, it's the summer. Like, I'm just so programmed to ordering this iced coffee. And like, I did. And I'm like, why am I doing this? It really makes no sense, but it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like I'm identifying a season with the kind of drink that I'm drinking, and breaking that doesn't make any sense to me. It's still June, regardless of the temperature. It's still June. So I'm drinking my iced coffee. You know what I mean? So I feel like that was something that stuck in my head. Like, I think that's inertia. I mean, I was logically thinking through the fact that I shouldn't be drinking an iced coffee, but
I mean, that's why the whole point you were making before about how comfort could lead to logical inconsistencies really struck a chord with me. I just think that there are like invisible rules sometimes that we ascribe to ourselves because it has worked so often in the past that it's like, I must do it this way. I must go to the big laundromat. It's June. Like, look at the calendar. Therefore, I should have this coffee instead of like, and we say this a lot too, but like really being aware of the moment and being in the moment to say, I walked past a perfectly fine laundromat and these clothes are heavy and it's hot. I should just go in there and do my thing. And it's cold in June, which it was unseasonably cold at the beginning of June. So maybe hot coffee is better.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Sonika, this has been a great conversation. As we begin to close out the episode, are there any last messages that you'd like to leave our listeners, our viewers, because we're on camera? Is there anything that you'd like to leave them with?
I think of everything, just to kind of simplify everything that I mentioned, it's, one, understanding that inertia is doing the same thing, even when you logically, rationally know there's a better option. That is not the same as a habit, because with inertia, you're aware, and with a habit, you're not. But habits are can be part of that inertia system. And so habits, just side by side habits, is autopilot. It's driven by routine, things that you do every day. It needs interruption. When we think about that loop, the loop needs to be interrupted and replaced with something different. Components of that loop need to be replaced with something different. So that's a habit. When we think about inertia is really, I would say, driven by not autopilot, but hesitation. It's driven by avoiding something new, avoiding something uncertain, leaning into something that's more comfortable. Again, more of that rational lens. And instead, to break inertia, we don't interrupt something or replace it necessarily, again, because it's just not that simple. What we need to do is lean into ways to elevate motivation and momentum. And so if we can kind of approach it differently than a habit, we have, obviously a better chance to shape it. And the last thing I'll say is that, back to the ecosystem point, let's not just focus on one audience. If we are focusing on an HCP behavior, yes, we need to focus on that doctor. We need to focus on everything that's fueling an inert behavior, everything in that system. But a very important component of that system are other people in the the system and their inertia playing into the doctor's inertia. A patient's comfort level is going to directly affect the doctor's comfort level in doing something for that patient. Human beings feed off of one another. And so again, when we do research, when we do intervention strategies, we oftentimes will say, this is the doctor's strategy, this is the patient's strategy, this is the payer strategy, but instead let's find a little bit of that overlap in how those players feed into one another, interact, and kind of approach it from that lens as well.
I think that's great. I think one thing that really I'm going to take away from this episode is that inertia isn't always a bad thing. And so there are opportunities for us to implement, reinforce, even reward maybe positive inertia.
I think yes, to that point, there's positive inert behaviors. And when we are tasked with, we're marketer, we have this behavior change that we want to see, we have this inert behavior, then we kind of we work as teams and we lay it all out, we put it on a whiteboard, we map out what's going on, map out the positive behaviors as well. Use that as leverage, right? Use that as leverage to change the behaviors that we want to change. So yeah, I think I'm really glad you brought that up. It's a really important point. And hey, for those who are listening, watching, what we hope that this just kind of gives you more of a guidance, a framework, some quick hits, so that way you can start we're not obviously on every team. We're small but mighty, but we're not in every ideation session. And so these are just some important things to take with you as you're doing this work. Hey, we have this behavior. Okay, even if you can just get to the point of there's this behavior. Okay, what's the inert behavior? What are some habits? Let's start mapping out the ecosystem. Let's start mapping out the positive behaviors that we can lean into. All of that, that's a really great start, a really important start. So if anything, hopefully this episode just kind of gives you all the start of tools on how to change behavior.
And two things I wanted to jump in and at the end, I would love to work on projects where we reward patient inertia and, HCP inertia and say look, you're doing a lot of a good thing. Here are more benefits to reinforce the fact that these behaviors are good. And the second thing is that, Sonika, as you were going through the steps or strategies to break inertia, one that keeps coming up in my mind is particularly when we talk about reinforcing positive inertia is this idea of psychological momentum. And it's kind of recognizing that it's already there. And so I think it's, when you take away from this episode, the strategies to break inertia, it's, you can mold them to leverage positive inertia in that same way.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, cool. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I think this is, I enjoyed relearning about some of this. I think it's always a great opportunity and we can talk about it differently. I'm not going to say that inertia is the low cost of doing nothing anymore. I'm going to take that out of my vocabulary. So.
Definitely. And Sonika, as I said at the top, it's a pleasure to have you on as a co-host for this, because being able to break down inertia and speak to it the way you did, I'm not going to lie and be a fake podcasty anything. I learned a lot just from these last 30 minutes, seriously. Great. So thank you for that.
Awesome. No, thank you. That was a great conversation, and let's continue to have more of them. So thanks, Gabe.
For sure. And we'll close it out there. For Breaking the Code, I'm Gabriel Allen Cummings.
And I'm Sonika Garcia.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Breaking the Code is a podcast by the Havas Medical Anthropology Group. Hosted by Sonika Garcia and Gabriel Allen Cummings, with inspiration coming from all of you. Thank you for listening and for your continued support. If you enjoyed this episode or had any questions for the team, feel free to leave a rating, subscribe, and send us a message to our mailbox at medicalanthropology@havas.com. Until next time.